So next, let's speak about understanding security threats. There's a well-known phrase by Sun Tzu saying, if you know both yourself and your enemy, you can win 100 battles without a single loss. Well, of course, this doesn't really apply within network security. It's close to, but doesn't always apply for a specific reason, because as I was saying, even if you're gonna end up with your analysis when you're in your organization, that in order to secure the network, you have to implement kind of couple of technologies in specific regions of the network. In the end, it's going to be a cost analysis as well, and you're going to end up being able to secure specific assets up to a specific level, never 100%. And even if you could invest all the money in the world, you're still not going to reach that level because of the nature of the internet, to call it that way. Because for a packet to go from point A to point B, it passes through so many operating systems, so many technologies, and all of them have more or less a lot of vulnerabilities. Each system, each protocol, each software, piece of software has a lot of vulnerabilities. Some of them are well known, and some of them are, let's say, not that commonly known. It happens a lot that a vulnerability, which was, for example, known by the attackers for 5 years ago, it just showed up the last year. So for 4 years, nobody, let's say, was publicly aware of that specific vulnerability, which means for those 4 years, everybody was vulnerable to a specific vulnerability. So the thing is, how can you protect your network against something that you don't know? So if you don't know how you can be attacked because you're not aware of specific vulnerabilities, then how can you protect your network? So that phrase is valid, of course, assuming you're going to know exactly all of the vulnerabilities that can be exploited by the attackers, which that never happens. And it's always the case that the attackers are going to find out the vulnerabilities before the organizations finds out about those existing vulnerabilities, and then they can take measures to implement the proper security technologies to defend and secure their assets and the network. Either way, the first step in designing network security and preventing a security breach is to understand what types of threats exist. So we're just speaking about types of attacks, not about vulnerabilities. And then the second step is to understand which ones of those types of threats applies to your environment, and that's called the risk threat, the risk of threat. So for example, if you are aware about, let's say, Linux operating system vulnerabilities, but it's a specific Linux deployment, which is Ubuntu 5.1, for example. If you don't have that system running in your network, it means you're not vulnerable to a specific threat range. So you have to be aware of how can the attackers get access to your data and get access in your and get in your network in order to get access to your data. But then you have to identify which of those threats apply to your environment, because as I was saying, you're not vulnerable to an FTP attack if you don't run an FTP server. If you're not vulnerable to a specific Linux operating system vulnerability if you don't have that specific system in your network. So out of the possible, let's say, threats that exist in there, you have to identify which ones are applicable to your environment. And then the next step is to identify the costs to implement countermeasures against those identified threats. And as I was saying before, if on that analysis you end up that the costs to implement specific countermeasures to defend the network are going to outweigh the possible losses, it means that it'll never be implemented unless, as I was saying, regulations forces the organization to do that. And this completely makes sense, right? I mean, think about it like the insurance, like the insurance companies. If your car, let's say, if you have a car which you want to insure it, you want to provide insurance for your car. If your car, let's say, you take an analysis and you end up with a conclusion that your car is worth, let's say, $10,000. And then you go ahead and want to insure that car against being stolen or against being vandalized. And if the insurance company is going to ask you for $20,000 to protect and secure and guard a $10,000 car, are you going to end up paying that amount of money? Of course not. Because at that point you're going to say, if I lose that car, it's better off to just buy a new car, and I'm better off with that countermeasure rather than paying $20,000 to insure a car which is valued at $10,000, so half the amount of money required to insure the car. And we have two types of threats. Of course, threats are going to be further divided into a lot of categories, but primarily speaking, we have what is called an external threat and an internal threat.